Welcome everyone to another amazing session of Paklaunch. Ali Fahad and team always manage to bring great guests, and I always learn from every session. So I always love volunteering to moderate. Uh, Today we've got Amir Husain, who's the co-founder of Argon Mechatronics, and then Bilal Zuberi, who's a general partner at Lux Capital. I think it's a great combo, especially given that it's a topic that try to learn about every day, and I'm spending every waking hour learning about AI and its impact on our lives and I would say, frankly, all of our professions. So with that, Amir, if I could get a quick background about yourself, and then Bilal will do the same with you.
Lovely to be with both of you guys. Faisal, my background is I'm a computer scientist by training. I've been in Texas now for nearly 30 years. I came to study computer science at UT Austin, dropped out of the PhD program, started my first software company, sold it, did another couple of companies. In 2012, I started a business called Spark Cognition, which grew to be a large company. It went past 1.4 billion in valuation. Then we also launched a joint venture with Boeing, a company called SkyGrid, which has grown quite substantially large now, based here in Austin, doing AI for safe traffic integration. And then I moved on from Spark Cognition. The company is now called Avathon. I'm still on the board, but I decided that now was the time for me to focus on more than one thing. So I'm currently working on a robotics company, humanoid robotics company focused on manufacturing, which is called Argon Mechatronics. I'm also building a mesh networking company called Spec5, which I think is huge for decentralized comms. And then with my wife, Zabe, we have some family investments, about 20 to 30 companies in exponential areas from space to quantum to BCI, AI. And then aside from that, I serve as the chairman of World Quant Foundry, which is a venture incubator, which I launched in partnership with Steve Lau and Igor Tulchinsky. We now have seven of our first companies incubated. Many of them will be coming out of stealth mode in the next literally like couple of months. And our goal is to build a portfolio of 100 companies there uh, with a very hands-on kind of a model working with founders. So that's a little bit, I've worked on policy defense and written some books and stuff, but I think this is what's germane to the topic today.
Amazing, thank you. Bilal, would love to get your background and how you ended up in eventually California.
Awesome. So I started off as an academic, did my PhD in physical chemistry at MIT, and decided to build products for the real world. So I became an entrepreneur and started a company in advanced materials that was sold to Corning. And then a bunch of VC firms came calling, and I ended up, after some deliberation, joining a firm called General Catalyst. And I was there for 5 years and helping them build their deep tech practice. Most VC firms tend to have traditional enterprise software and consumer practices. Some of the brave ones would also have a biotech practice, but everything else becomes the other. At GC, our primary investors were endowments of Princeton, Yale, MIT, and others. And the idea was we have some incredible innovation coming out of these labs and others, but how do we have an institutionalized way of commercializing that and backing them? So that's what I did for about 5 years there when founders of a smaller firm called Lux Capital reached out and asked if I would join them as a partner and help them build as they were starting to scale. When I joined them, they were 100 million under management, first institutional fund, and they were raising a $250 million fund. We've grown. I've been there 11 and a half years, and we've grown that business to now 5 billion under management, 250 or so portfolio companies. We invest at the intersection of technology
Wow.
and sciences, and I've invested across all of the spaces. I'm actually stepping down from the GP role there to start a new fund and starting a new fund called Red Glass Ventures that will be focused on early stage investing at the intersection of AI and the physical world. I specifically, I think this is a very interesting and important moment in technology transformation. And I think it's going to be very important for actually a lot of physical industries, because a lot of discussion around AI tends to focus on a lot more digital industries and the traditional, search or legal or customer service apps or that type of stuff. I have my views on why that's deflationary in its structure and hard to build businesses there that are sustainable for the long run. But physical world where you have, think of industrials, automation, manufacturing, defense, national security, healthcare, construction, automotive, and stuff. These are the industries that are going to be rapidly transformed by the AI tsunami passing through them. And I want to be focused on those industries, and especially at the early stages, because a lot of people don't have the gut for taking the risk at the very early stages, but I've done that for 16, 17 years of investing, and I want to continue doing that.
Amazing. This is great because I'm going through one of those periods where I'm really going back and reflecting on what I do and how it's going to change. I think this impacts all of us. And I do think that we're in a new era where the return of the deep tech and tech founder is back, and not just simple non-tech platform founders, because this is an infrastructure and structural change to the economy. What I'll do is I'll set the context for the audience specifically. We'll start off more from a general perspective, as everybody I think is still learning about the implications of the intersection of AI and robotics and how it's going to impact our society and way of life in the future. For me personally, when I look at it, we're in a conundrum today where central banks have kept rates so low that we're in a very inflationary environment. And Bilal, you touched upon this a little bit earlier. I personally feel that it's a very strange environment where you have inflation on the one hand that's induced through low interest rates and money printing, but simultaneously we're about to head into an efficiency gradually over the coming years where you're going to see deflationary effect in everything from manufacturing to pretty much every segment of life, especially once you start to get robotics into play. I think I was reading the other day that Xiaomi's got a fully automated factory where they're churning out, literally phones in seconds versus in minutes. And the cost of labor is roughly $1.60 to $2 per hour versus $5.60, which is the current cost per hour for labor, human labor. With that context, I'd love to get your respective perspectives on how fast is this going to happen? Is this, we're hearing all sorts of stuff like by 2027, a lot of entry-level jobs through AI agents will be impacted, whether it's things like accounting and basic logic-based jobs, and then eventually mid-level employees, and then possibly C-level, depending on the job function. So would love to get your respective perspectives on this. Well, Amir or Bilal, whoever wants to take this first, I'll kind of do it in a free flow back and forth conversation.
I'll let Amir take it first because he's thought about this a lot, and obviously building humanoids that are really the most human form of robotics that you can find. So maybe Amir, you take it, and then I'll add some different color to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you. So I think the way to think about this is that since the beginning of time, whenever we've kind of put a formal understanding on economics, we've talked about these three factors of production. We've talked about land, labor, and capital. And each one of these is kind of irreplaceable. You need all three in order to be productive. What we're finding with technology is that it's now arrived at the juncture where intelligence embodied, i.e., human level intelligence, or at least high level task intelligence that can actually do a job, embedded in a physical system that is also mechanically adept enough to do that job. That moment has arrived. So for the first time, capital is actually replacing labor or poised to replace labor. Because if these machines can do what only mankind has been able to do so far, that is, yes, at one level, you can process that change in the fundamental equation of economics, and you can say, well, what this means that people will lose jobs. Okay, But there's much deeper implications of that because the empowerment of capital, which is already extreme in this world, and there has been so much written about that, I don't need to beat that drum, that there's a clear connection between this type of technology and that further acceleration of a negative trend. So the way that I think about this is that, of course, technology remains a tool and all these platitudes that we talk about where, it can be used for good and bad, etc. But I mean, somebody's got to do it, right? You can't just keep saying it can be used for good and bad, and out there in the world, somebody has to bend the metal and get the motors running and put a controller and put in an algorithm and tie it with a sensor and make it do something, either good or bad. So from that
Yep.
standpoint, what I think is the real opportunity is kind of putting this level of autonomy in the hands of people that have never had capital. So in other words, use the deflationary elements around technology that you're talking about, Faisal, and fuse them with fundamental democratization and decentralization to instead create a world where people can actually do much more with far less capital in more productive ways. So you decentralize the capability to create, which on the whole, at scale at least, capital has controlled. So where capital is getting a win, you balance it out in this way. I mean, there's multiple more points on this. This is obviously a very deep topic. But to my view, and my kind of just my war cry these days is technologies of freedom. Like stuff that I want to build needs to empower people. And it doesn't need to create another situation where 3 or 4 companies have a valuation of 10 or 12 trillion dollars and every other unicorn startup in the world combined has a valuation of 3 or 3.5. And part of the reason why is because the large guys are rent seekers. You can't build a business without going through their cloud, their API, their database backend, and anything you want to use in the open ecosystem, they'll buy eventually. So I think this whole notion of decentralization combined with this shift is key. That's how I look at it.
Excellent.
Um,
Bilal, what's your
I,
thought here?
I think it's very powerful and I think there's like so many layers that we can peel this onion of what Amir was just saying. Let me say 3 quick things. One is, Jeff Hinton was recently found saying that, we think humans are very smart and intelligent, somehow super smart and super intelligent. When the reality is that a majority of us are just pattern recognition machines. Most of the work we do is not deep thinking. And, and I think you and I can see that in our own lives, right? Like a lot of things we do isn't exactly like, my God, like some super brain powers we used. It's just there, and this entire conversation we're having is sort of each individually, what we've learned over a period of time is sort of now bringing it
100%.
back up, not doing at this moment some deep thinking. We're not inventing something new, but that's what we're doing. This is part of our life. And to the extent human beings are effectively pattern recognition machines, machines could replace a lot of what they do. Now, I think Amir's work and many other companies are taking it further by saying, hey, the mechanical aspects of what we do, not just thinking of it, that can be replaced as well. And a lot of robotics and automation tends to do that. So I think that will happen. So I think a lot of jobs will be transformed. But the second thing I would say, it reminds me a little bit of, I was old enough when internet came around to observe it as a participant. And, the first wave of the internet was, it felt like it'd be commerce, basically, right? Like some form of commerce and communication. But look where it took us to, where my children growing up, don't know a world that existed before Instacart, DoorDash, all these delivery services, Uber, and so on. Like the world they observe is very different than the world I grew up with. Right. And I think we should think about AI the same way, that even 10 years from now, the way the world will function might look very different than it is today. We're waiting for some of those critical things to happen. Like If humanoids are able to do work nonstop that requires human level dexterity or manipulation, um, there may not be a need for workers in the factories, or at least certain kinds of workers in the factories, and certain kind of procedures to be done. We've seen how that happens when other machines are able to do tasks in a certain way. Surgery is no longer done by people cutting open, and there's a lot of robotics that are used in surgical instrumentation, and of course there's a surgeon sitting somewhere doing it, but AI is only a matter of time before AI can do that manipulations much
100%.
better. We have these conversations that, hey, find a surgeon who has a steady hand. I mean, for heaven's
Yeah,
sakes,
I was gonna say.
we have robotics that are much more stable than a surgeon's stable hand, right? Like, gone are the days when you're going to be looking for that. The third thing I'd say is that a lot of conversation around AI job loss tends to be around, oh, will the lawyers lose their jobs, or bankers lose their jobs, or accountants, or VCs will lose their jobs, right? And frankly, my reaction to all of that is, number one, I don't really care that much. I don't really worry that much, sorry, that people will lose their jobs and somehow we'll have a revolt in society. I think we will find many other productive ways of engaging the community. But I think the bigger issue is, in the interim, it is not the VCs that I worry about losing their jobs. What I worry about is actually, in a middle of America, small town, in our context, America, somebody who's growing up in utter poverty, whose only way out of the misery of their life was to be able to get a high school diploma and go work at the local plant and be able to get a job there making $30,000, $40,000, then move up, at least somewhat up out of their utter poverty situation, right? That used to be sort of the little bit of a ladder available to people. If we take that ladder away, I think the space that we create between the haves and the have-nots becomes very large, right? So our kids who are growing up completely native to AI, who are using AI for all kinds of techniques, technologies, and building around it, they're almost living in an entirely different world from the people who are growing up in other parts of the world or other parts of these countries where AI is not available, right? We're still trying to bring internet to everybody in America, and now we're talking about AI, and we're taking away the jobs and occupations that they had previously had access to, or previously were told, look up to this and can you get to that. That, I think, is how society deals with that is an open question. I know Amir and I both have thought about this a lot. A lot of other people have talked about, do you have universal basic income? You have some other methodology of, what's the interim solution that we pass through? And how does long term, there will be a lot more economic value generated, but distribution of that is a little bit unclear how that happens.
Absolutely. I mean, what you guys are touching upon is exactly what I've been pondering on almost obsessively for the last like I would say 3 months, where once I started realizing this is, we're in a conundrum or a transition. I think the same one that took place from the agrarian economy to the industrial economy, and you go through this 15, 20-year period of retooling. In that case, it would be the farm worker getting retooled in the mechanization, what was the industrial age mechanization. But this one is a lot more disruptive, where it's not going to discriminate too much between white collar and blue collar. There may be different lag effects here, and obviously that's speculative. I'm going to touch upon something both of you said, because that was pertinent in one of the things I've been trying to understand. The very concept of capitalism itself, and the word we've gotten used to, at least the ones we've grown up in, is that you put capital to work and it finds the most efficient place, and then you have consumers that consume products that are produced from it, right? And touching upon that, and if we enter a world where people don't have a source of income, so then even if we have a deflationary effect, we're not so who are we producing this everything for, right? Whether if we mechanize everything, it's coming out like for a penny, just hypothetically. But if you don't have a consumer, so that deflationary effect kicks in. And again, I do think, again, this is speculative, that a UBI type scenario may come in where governments may have to step in a stopgap measure and hand it out. Obviously, that may not be equitable depending on different parts of the world, where governments may not have the depth to actually, financial depth to actually hand out UBI. Would love to get your respective takes on that. Is this going to really retool structurally society as a structurally? I know we've got certain models, and I'll touch on one more third element of this, and this is an open debate that's happening these days. Look, if we go back to history, you typically had the relatively the three income brackets that we have gotten used to in the industrial age is a relatively new phenomenon. But if you look at history, you have royalty, nobility that works for them, and then you have basically the general class that's working in on the land or in factories, right? And again, factories I'll have a departure in because that's where the middle income and lower middle income came in. Um, so what happens with the people that own the LLMs in the large tech companies, as I mean, you had alluded to the multi-trillion-dollar companies. Do they become the new feudals intertwined with governments? And again, this is not targeting one country or the other. This is an open question. And then those that work for them or affiliated with them are the nobles, and then there's everybody else that are UBI recipients. So, would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, so see, money has a gravity. And if you go back to when software companies came about, Bill Gates created the first commercial software company. And in a small period of time, software companies became very popular because they basically can sell 100% margin product. The incremental cost with every incremental copy is basically tends to zero. So it became one of the best types of businesses. So it attracted a lot of capital. When it attracted a lot of capital, it kept becoming bigger, and we were at that point where the hardware was supporting that. So you ended up with very large software companies. These software companies for a long time didn't know how to deal with Washington, D.C. And in fact, Bill Gates was criticized through his early career many times for not having people in DC that would go push his agenda and so on and so forth. It was only when he dealt with the antitrust suit that he realized that this was probably now time to go learn Washington. And that lesson has been internalized by the technology community since that time. That one antitrust case made everybody smart to knowing how to operate in Washington. So you had two things. You had the collection of money is gravity, in these companies which have extremely high margin. They don't need to operate like a low margin company does, because a low margin company has many dependencies on elements of the economy and on elements of tariff policies and things like that. These guys generally are not as impacted. And then you had a connection with how Washington is run. So now if you look at the large technology companies, all of them hire former politicians, former bureaucrats, and they put them at the top levels. My point in telling you this is that, and then what happens? These same companies also, get support to build a big data center. They also get support to offset some of the expenses of their highly digitized cars. They also get support on maybe immigration policies that are favorable to them. I'm not calling each one of these policies good or bad. I'm just saying that there is a very complex, interconnected web of things that enable people that have acquired the highest quality capital in a capitalist economy to naturally begin to break capitalism. That's why we have things like antitrust. That's why we have things like the Gini measure and things that measure the equality in society. Peter Turchin wrote about this, and he says, look, I've done the biggest data-based search of what happens throughout history. And my thesis is not that poverty kills societies. It's not the French peasants that one day decided that they would go out with pitchforks and go attack the royals. It was actually the elite, and this was the overproduced elite that was felt in society that something was their due and they couldn't get it. And this happens in spades when you have a society where there's too much concentration of wealth. And what, a dozen people in America now control more money than the bottom 50%. It's one of the most disparate places. So why am I setting this stage? I'm just setting the stage to say this is how we got here. It's very important to understand this without any ambiguity. And then it's not about technology alone. This topic is not just about AI. You now see nexuses develop between people that are wanting to sell more software to government customers, paying money to the same politicians, those politicians in turn buying more software. So in a system, even like ours, which is a higher quality system than most other places in the world, that level of I would say, questionable practices has reached to a point where it's become self-reinforcing. And the problem is not just who controls the LLMs controls AI. Because now if somebody comes out with a better LLM, you take all the other non-technical capabilities that these companies have built. How many people they have in Washington, how many congressmen they're close to, all of this kind of stuff, the political, non-technical stuff. And they're able to say, no, this LLM is banned. Okay, somebody comes up with the best drone. They say, no, that drone is banned. Somebody is importing a certain type of raw material, and now these guys can say, oh, no, that's banned. And then when it comes to action against them, they can do something massive, which leads to huge financial wins for them. And the same establishment, the same government, the same people who today are in the government and tomorrow will be working for these big companies when the government changes, and then this revolving door of Washington, which much has been written about, it's gotten to the point where you just don't know what's being done on merit and what's being done just because there's a collusion. So, they can do whatever, they walk away with a slap on their hand. And this is not one case, two cases, three cases. A lot of these guys deliberately go do something because they know the fine is going to be so small, it's totally fine. I'll just pay the fine. I have basically 100% margin monopoly business, and there's a lot of people watching out for me. So I'm going to stop here, but my point is that it is actually an oversimplification to say that he or she that builds the best LLM controls the world. Yes, ceteris paribus, under all other conditions being equal, all other variables being equal, yes, but all other variables are not equal. The technology business has learned to play the political game in spades. I don't want to name companies, but you can look around. Like, there's no large technology company now that doesn't have like 10 former politicians and generals and others involved. And by the way, you can't get business done without that, because then it becomes kind of a clique. So these are all things to think about. If a young company is doing that to learn the business, working with a mentor and an expert, that's one thing. But if a large company goes and buys an entire cadre of former government officials just for influence, they're not trying to learn anything. They're trying to, change the outcome. And that stifles innovation. That creates an environment which you can't call pure capitalism by a long shot.
I'll just add quickly.
Bilal, what's your thought here?
I'll just quickly add, because I'm sure others also want to have more tactical questions answered rather than more philosophical, which I would say, I've been recently got introduced to this book, Finite and Infinite Games. Bill Gurley talked about this. It's James Carse, who wrote this book in like 1986. And it says, effectively, the premise is that a lot of our thinking in world has been developed by these finite games. What are finite games? These are all the games we play, like a cricket match. It's 50 overs or whatever, 20 over match. Somebody wins, somebody loses. The end goal is for me to defeat you, right? It's a set period. The rules are set. You know exactly what's an LBW, what is not, right? And my job is to beat you. So in AI, you hear naive discussions, which is like America has to win over China in AI, or will Pakistan be beaten by India in AI, or whatever, right? The balkanization that people are talking about in AI. Should we have our own LLMs, and what will happen if we don't have our own LLMs? This is all coming out of the context of finite games. Somebody will win and somebody will lose. The reality is that there's also infinite games. Infinite games are fluid games. Rules are open. The end goal is not to win or lose. The end goal is participation and engagement, right? So love, education, culture, personal growth, philosophy, these are infinite games. In the games that you play to have a good relationship with your spouse, you're not trying to win over them. You're not trying to be the dominant personality. You're trying to figure out, we're going to live this entire life together until we die. How do we make it work? You win some, I lose some, but the important thing is that engagement is high. And I think AI is going to be more of that sort than not. There's not going to be some end point that we reach that, oh, we have the third offset and we won, and now China has to, be behind us. We got the nuclear power before they did, so now we can just bomb them before they get nuclear power, right? This is what happens when both of you have nuclear power. Now what do? Right? Because you've reached a point where you can just obliterate everybody, but now you have to figure out how to survive. And I think that's
The
it's
stalemate.
important to,
But
it's important to understand that some things in life are not finite game context ready or appropriate, but they're infinite games. And you're trying to get, and in those infinite games, you have more cooperation, more collaboration. You have to work together because you want engagement. United States will want other people to participate. See what's happening with these tariffs, right? Like silly decisions by a few people has repercussions everywhere, and the whole world was going to fall apart, and then reforming of alliances because everybody's like, we're still going to make shit, we're going to buy shit, and fine. It has implications on elections around the world and so on, but you got to survive, right? Canada is not going away, right? Pakistan is not going away. China is not going away. So how are we going to then collaborate with each other? And I think it's important to keep that in mind so that everything doesn't become, one has to end. Somebody has to die for me to win.
and I'll jump into the technical aspect of it. So you're a venture capitalist, and I'd love to get your take because as I'm looking at different AI platforms to invest in, and obviously more in our part of the world, it's mostly just agents built on top of existing large LLMs, or there's usually some sort of a API interface with other applications. Um, what type of stuff are you looking at? I'm struggling with trying to figure out how do you even build a tech moat, but I think I don't have that level of a deep tech understanding. I'm coming from more of a platform investment style, trying to learn about this stuff. So I would love for you to give me your take on, how you
Oh, I think
dissect this vertical.
there's like an unending set of technical problems to solve and build technical moats around. I mean, I think, we thought ChatGPT had won everything, and then DeepSeek comes around and
Right.
changes the equation, and now everybody's thinking what to do. You have computing that's happening in the cloud. You start pushing for all kinds of reasons to the edge where you can't take an entire ChatGPT model and take it to the edge on a small computer. So what are you going to do? Small models, and then you have things where you need single shot learning. So there's a lot of, and then you have compute and compute architectures, and so there's no shortage of interesting businesses to be built. Look, 1960s, 1996, 1997, if you wanted, like, oh, I discovered this thing called the internet. So what would you do? You started like a shoe company online, selling shoes online, or you're selling, wine online or some other nonsense, right?
Or
Now,
books online.
well, yeah, and some of those companies became massive, like books online, right?
Right.
And
Amazon.
and yeah, and so it's we're in that phase right now, which is like, hey, I can use AI tooling to replace this kind of a work, or I can automate your, XYZ in your workflow at work, whether it's an enterprise or in consumer. I can do customer service better. I can create a chatbot for you that's customized to you. I can do local training. I can do optimization. That's what's happening, and that's fine. Some of these business will be interesting. More important thing, as I always say, is you got to own the problem, not the solution, because the underlying solution set will keep evolving and evolving faster than you can keep up. You've got to be focused on, can you use whatever the best available technology is at that time, addressing the problems that you're solving for, right? Amazon started off as, we're not going to have any, stores, and eventually ended up building stores where you could go buy groceries, right? So because the world had changed by that time and technologies available to them had changed by that time. So I think the same thing will happen here. As I'm looking at, new investments, you will find data is becoming scarce. What I mean by that is that all the data that was in the public domain has already been consumed by most models. And it's become commoditized, right? If you train your data on YouTube or Reddit or whatever, it's nothing new special about it. So what can you do with it? If you think even of LLMs like Sakana and others, what they're doing is they're doing complex, medley of models working together to be able to create lower cost solutions for certain applications. And then last but not the least is, I think I tend to focus a lot on AI applied to the physical world. And the reasoning for that is that when you think of, if your customer base is tech companies like LinkedIn or Airbnb or whatever, few things happen. Number one, at every step of the way, these guys are making a build or buy decision, right? So if your solution is not the cutting edge one, they're going to say, we can just do it internally because they have very strong technical teams internally. Compare that to when you're selling a solution to the Schneiders or Honeywells or GMs or Toyotas of the world, they do not have large IT teams, right? These are lower margin businesses that haven't been spinning out so much cash that they can build, 1,000-person strong software team. right? So they have to buy from the outside, which is why you see that when I see a company say 0 to 20 million in revenues in the first 20 days, what comes to my mind first is great, but also that means it's not that difficult to get there. So there'll be 5 other companies wanting to do that, which is why I think it's going to be harder to build companies that have consistent moat in those spaces. Whereas if you're selling into the government, or you're selling into automotive, or you're selling into complex environments, you end up becoming more likely to be what looks like an N of one company. Think of the Palantirs or the Samsaras or the Applied Intuitions of the world, the Procores of the world, the Flock Safeties of the world. Each one of these is $5 to $150 billion company, right? And that's because when they figured out how to sell into that industries. They're not selling one single solution. They're not selling, I can just sell you this chatbot that you can use. They're saying, you have a series of problems. I become your trusted partner and I can help you build that. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be competitors to Palantir and all. They will be. But it starts to tell you that it's, why isn't there another Palantir, right? I can name 5 customer service tool companies that are worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. But we're still struggling to find the second big Palantir company. It's not that easy to sell into those industries. And I think the great founders figure out how to do that. So either you have a technical mode and the kind of thing, like, if you're building a humanoid robot, building a humanoid mechanically is not difficult. Optimus is there and Figure is there and there, Unitary is there and all. But building the intelligence into it, that starts to be really hard. And that is, I think, if you can actually do that, then you can solve very interesting problems. And there people will have their own takes. Should you have the humanoid form function? Is that the best humanoid form? Is that the best form function? Depending on the task you want to solve. And I think as an investors, we have to think through that quite a bit, and make sure we make the right bets that are long-term positive, not just a short-term, nice problem now, let's go build it and sell it to somebody.
That's very nicely put. It's opens up many portals of in my brain to go and investigate. So amazing. Amir, on what you're building, I'd love to get your take on, what do you think are some of the complexities there, and why do you feel, going to robotics, what's the niche that you're going after there? Since, as Bilal mentioned, there's so many other competitors out there.
The last 15 plus years, I've basically been building things that are physical and that use AI. So everything from controlling aircraft to controlling pumps, interfacing with solar and wind energy, with oil rigs, and so on. So all of the stuff that we did was out in the world. One of the very strong opinions that I have now is that the real way to solve problems with AI is not to tell somebody to consider doing something. It's not a system of advice. It's a system of getting the damn job done. And in the physical world, the thing that gets the damn job done is called a robot. Now, it can look different. It can have different kinds of actuators and tools, and it can be configured in many different ways. People take a kind of a novice lens and they look at a lot of the robots doing backflips, and we all get impressed with how dexterous these things are. And it is very impressive from a mechanical engineering standpoint. But in the business, you look at that and you say, okay, for that extra bit of functionality for which I had to put in a ton more money, more actuators, this type of actuator, spent an extra 3 months working on getting the algorithms to balance the robot properly. What did I get commercially? Like, what was my incremental opportunity for making it do a backflip? And that's the part that I'm really focused on. I'm not interested in backflips. I'm interested in using robots to build problems, using robots to precisely wield instruments that today only humans can wield. I'm interested in using robots to replace 10 machines at a time so that the robot can really be the moving machine of any 10 with replaceable tool heads as the end effector. And I'm interested in a robot that, yes, can be driven completely by a neural network, but given that I've worked in really tough industries from aviation to defense to oil and gas, many regulated industries, I also know that when this purely neural network controlled robot comes in doing flips in an environment where you require certification of safety, and the answer is, well, this robot is just being run by a neural network entirely which is a complete black box, well, then goodbye. The FAA, we work with the FAA. Now, eventually, maybe they'll get there, but the FAA does not allow you to control an aircraft with a neural network because it's not explainable. It's not transparent. It's not the kind of control system that they have in their mechanism to certify. So I'm giving you this as one example. I guess the two things I'm saying is number one, a lot of what's happened with kind of social media, et cetera, is, the cool video sells. The backflip is cool. And so that's fine. But people that are actually building businesses in this space need to focus on what they're actually going to do. And the purpose behind building a robot is to not recommend to a human as to what they can do, but to do that thing for the human. So then you become even more focused and you say, okay, but in what domain? And what are the highest value tasks in that domain that I can have this robot do? And what economic opportunity does this afford me for the simplest design, the lowest cost design? Why simplicity? Because I don't want the robot to have a fruit fly's life. I want the robot to have at least a dog's life, right? 10, 12 years, the thing should work. And so in order to do that, I have to build in simplicity. I have to build in really easy upgradability. And you become, it's a completely different lens to the things that impress you when you look at these 3-second commercials on a robot doing some fancy physical move. And I'm using that as an analogy to say that good entrepreneurs are focused on what they're going to deliver to the world. And then they are more interested than anybody else in ensuring that what they thought they were delivering is actually being delivered. Now, along the way, they can learn, they can certainly pivot, they can find a higher value problem in their quest for the lower value problem. Yeah, all those things happen. But at the end of the day, like what fundamentally drives you? And I now believe that the challenge with how companies are being built now, many companies, which are very fashion oriented, like, everybody just brings the same thing. You're in this stage, you should be roughly this. Then the next stage, you should be roughly that. Then the third stage, you should be roughly that. And people kind of look at that and they look at that kind of like as an aspirational thing. And a lot of times, absent any internal belief in value delivery. So the biggest thing I would tell you is things that I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in convincing myself that the technology I'm building can solve unsolved problems more than I'm interested in convincing anyone else of anything. And I think that's probably not a bad approach. And as far as the use of AI in the physical world is where it matters. And it can't just be a system that says, hey, I recommend you go do this. No, do the thing. That's why I think of you as intelligent. Don't just give me more work to do. Do the thing. And that kind of heuristic you should apply to companies. Is this company pitching you like another pain in the ass list of things for a human to do? Or is this company actually going to get something done? And if it's the latter, then the ROIs become much more measurable because then the discussion about the technology stops and you have an established sense of success because you're in the business. So you have some person or some team delivering that capability today and you compare it. And that's what the entrepreneur has to own. That's the big shift, I think that world of like, I've got a slightly faster ODBC driver that I can upsell and then maybe one day have it bought by Microsoft kind of a thing that no one else but just the database guys and the OS guys maybe understand. That's not how you can innovate in AI, I don't think.
It leads me to and again, I'm going to come from more of a novice perspective. So what you said about, an artificial intelligence prompt effectively being able to do tasks, right? So there's, if I'm getting correctly, is agent protocols being created, which in my world are like APIs effectively, right? So you can, when you speak, it can actually execute a task, eventually machine to machine payments. And then what you're alluding to is the physical robotics side. So can you elaborate on that? How that world will work, just first conceptualize?
I'll try and do that very quickly. So, in artificial intelligence, there's the idea of an agent. An agent can have a memory. An agent is not just a one-time transaction. An agent has temporality, meaning it lives for a while. An agent can, even when you're not interacting with it, do work and change its goals. It can create sub goals. It has a planning element to it, and it has access to tools, and it has perception. Meaning that, for example, if an agent in the simplest way is solving a maze, then it might have a notepad to say this corner looked like this, and that's my memory of I've been here before. It could be that the agent has a watch that says, okay, I've been walking in a circle for so long, I got to stop and try something different. So those are examples of tools in an agent solving a maze. But of course, in the business context, agents can be anything. Agents can ultimately be the people that do a job today, like a travel agent, right? Does a thing, and now to a large extent, it's been automated. Now, MCP, which is this model context protocol, is a way that the industry is kind of gravitating towards specifying how to publish tools and make them available to LLMs. The providing an LLM life beyond the one query is not hard. It's basically you have a container with a contextualized process that doesn't die, that saves its past transactions. It can do things on its own. It has a planner, so it can even call other LLMs that might be more specialized in certain things. So that's not a big deal. The question is, in the digital world, yeah, there are integrations with platforms like Make and Zapier, right? Where Zapier does something, makes a post, checks an email, sends an email, sends some money, whatever the integrations are that you get from Zapier. And you can, using an MCP-based agent, you can automate something that works really well with Zapier. There are probably 500 companies that come out of just that. I got a bunch of unique MCP things. I got a bunch of, fine-tuned LLMs that do really well for this one thing. I've got the most reliable tools. I've gone and studied all the regulatory literature, and I know that I've got check steps along every way so that at scale this thing won't blow up. And I've got the engineering economics down to where I'll actually make more money than I'll spend. So, we got an actual business here. That's 500 businesses, maybe 5,000 businesses, just in the nexus of that. But what to me, and I've done that. So, we have been in situations where even years ago, before all these things were called, this agentic AI wasn't really a thing. At the end of the day, you have AI that's running on its own with no human, interaction, is going and turning a valve or, optimizing a process in the physical world at a cement plant or with energy or with a solar panel. It's tilting and shifting. It's causing a wind turbine to move. So we've been doing these things for years. So to me, it's not like a big deal, that leap, that cognitive leap of coming out in the physical world and doing things. So, a robot for me is a platform that extends that like 100-fold and brings it to manufacturing, which is a big part of the discussion in this country right now, and also ties in with my personal ethos of creating technologies that are harder to turn into monopolies. That these are technologies that are distributed by nature, they can be used by everyone. They are at once physical systems, which impact people's lives in the physical world, and at the same time, they are technologies of freedom, which are less likely to lead to the labor concentration, the capital black hole problem that I described earlier. The capital accrues until it just consumes everything, and then we're down to nothing. So that's basically the way I look at what we're doing, and that's kind of what I would tell entrepreneurs to do too. Think about the problems you're going to solve end to end, take the action, and specialize in all the things that you need to do in order to take safe, acceptable action in that domain. That is a moat. It's a big moat.
Can I say something from
Yeah,
I
please.
see options in here that, where value will accrue and what will VCs invest in and all that. I just want to make it clear people understand. Every VC fund is a 10-year fund. Okay. In the last 10 years, every person who's listening to this should go back and see what were all the things that were considered the hottest things in the world. Like AI is a last 3-year-old drama. Now, somebody like Amir has been working on it forever, but 3-4 years ago, nobody was talking about AI any more than anything else. People were talking about crypto and ICOs were going to change the world and everything. The whole financial industry is going to change. And before that, it was flying cars and drones and all of that. And before that, it was VR was going to change. We're not going to go anywhere because we're going to sit in a virtual world. All of that in the life of one single fund. That's a 10-year fund. So I would argue that people have to be very careful, especially on the Pakistanis in Pakistan who are listening to this, to not get carried away with bullshit statement that they're reading on TechCrunch articles or Twitter, where they probably spend way too much of their time. Everybody went, vector databases, and everybody went after, oh, we're going to do, now it's like agentic stuff. And I'm very sure somebody's going to email you and be like, oh, there's this MCP stuff. And have you talked about the MCP protocols? And forget about that nonsense, guys. Obsess about problems. If you fucking obsess about databases, you will come up with an important databases. But if you're not obsessed about databases, for heaven's sake, stop worrying about vector databases, right? If you don't obsess about robotics and how robots function, stop worrying about robotics. You're not going to get anywhere with robots because they're really smart people who are going to fucking kill you at robotics. Solve interesting problems. Mudassir, who built Kareem, that most Pakistani founders look up to as like the guru of Pakistani entrepreneurship, was obsessed about that problem. When he called me, he's a classmate of mine, when he called me, he wants to start this business. And I told him, this makes no fucking sense because Uber already exists and is expanding globally. You're going to just build another company to sell to Uber for $20 million. And he said, I obsess about how service needs to be provided in the regions that live in. And that's going to be very different than the way Uber operates. Right? And he obsessed about it and built a multi-billion-dollar company because of that, right? He didn't have to do some grand wizardry, right? He had to solve a real problem. Today in Pakistan, the fact that we don't have Uber or Kareem or whatever for all kinds of reasons means there's a real problem. Go solve that problem. If you have, we have plenty of labor in Pakistan. Labor shortage is not a problem. Factory labor shortage is a massive problem in America. So we're solving labor solution. That's not a problem for Pakistan, right? Compute is not something Pakistan is going to be working on. But utilizing international compute capabilities that are going to become available, especially in the Middle East, using that to figure out how we process our banking data better, health data better. We don't have enough qualified doctors and nurses in Pakistan. How do we solve that problem using AI? Those are the kinds of things where interesting companies are going to be built. And I think founders need to really start. When I meet a founder, the thing I think about very clearly is what are the tools and technologies in their toolbox that they can utilize, and what are the things that they obsess about? And if what they obsess about is an interesting problem set to work on, and they have the tools and technologies that can enable them to get going on it, and they will learn a lot of other things along the way, that becomes a very interesting sort of investment opportunity for me.
I love what you said about focusing on the problem and not just the solution. I think that's that in a place like Pakistan, that's how you have to think. I think what we'll do is we'll give people open the floor for some questions since we only have 7 minutes left. Bilal, I'm going to give you the first question since I know you have to leave a little bit early and almost on time. There's a question here on specifically, and I think this comes down because people are worried about how it's going to impact them, especially since we're on outsourcing. Do you believe AI will generate more jobs than it displaces? Are we heading towards a net loss traditional employment sectors? And then the subsequent one is basically talking about mid-level software engineers and entry-level software engineers. We're obsessed about outsourcing and looking at the Indian model with a lag effect. Everybody wants to set up an outsourcing shop. So what is your opinion on that particular element?
Oh, I actually generally think that there will be more jobs created in the long run. But I think there will be an interim phase where we're going to feel the pinch because the creative new jobs have not been generated yet, but they will come. Mm-hmm. Every time a new technologies come in, more jobs have been created. Industrialization was that, machines will do all the work. And what will all the farm workers do? Guess what? We have farm worker shortage in this country, and we are bringing them from other parts of the world to be able to do farming. The same thing happened across the board every time. And I think the same thing will happen here. There'll be an interim phase where I think, as I said, we will find that, it's a little bit like when the Roomba gets invented, you need fewer people to clean the floor. But, we find 500 other things for these people to do in our homes. So more people now have cleaners come into their homes than they used to come in 2000s when Roomba was invented. So I think that's the framework. Coding is a very interesting one. I've had lots of discussions. Replit founder is a close friend of mine. I've had conversations with Cursor and Windsurf guys. There's this whole idea of vibe coding that's out there. I think it's going to be real. I don't think that it replaces coding. Like everybody, people say you don't have to learn coding anymore. I don't think that's quite true. I think what happens is more people will be able to code than they used to. I think the hurdle was too high for coding. And I think that's going to get reduced. You're going to think of a problem. You're going to say, I can create this. Let's go do it.
Okay.
It's a little bit like what Stripe did for e-commerce. It became every developer could become a business guy because integrating payments was no longer some complex business thing. You just, in your code, you write something and boom, you can start collecting payments and you now have a business. And then the last thing I'd say is, think of the new industries that will get created. Right now, if you want to do a CAD drawing engineering, it's like you have to my God, I have to be a mechanical engineer to do this. Well, in the future, there will be, CAD that will also be vibe CADing will happening, right? And you will start there, but to make something that's, going to fit into a spaceship, you're going to have engineers who are going to then work with that. As a starting point, it'll be great. You can start prototyping, you can start doing simple things, but complexity will require even more, engineering teams to work on it with better tools at their disposal.
And that interim period, can you give us a guesstimated timeline on that? Like, is it 3 years, 5 years, 15 years of this disruption? I
think it's 5 to 10 years. What we will see is new businesses emerge and people, they take 3, 5, 7 years to grow. And then people will be like, okay, I need to do these kinds of things, right? It's an economic cycle in some ways that people will say, what kind of new things can I do, right? We created, about 10 years ago, we created all these Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and DoorDash and Instacart drivers, right? And now we have the Waymos and others coming that's like, automating a whole bunch of those functions, and they'll find other things to do. So I think it takes like a 7 to 10 year time frame before things roll over and new ideas emerge and new jobs emerge. And we will do the same thing here. We will be doing very interesting things. You can now go, it used to be, as a simple example, if I wanted to make a video for the launch of my new fund, there were, few people that you could go to. But now I can get amazing videography done, all generative AI, powered, with somebody sitting in Turkey or Jordan or Pakistan. That was not possible before. Now you can do that. You can create Hollywood-style movies sitting in Pakistan using Runway or solutions like that. So will Pakistanis sitting in Pakistan make Hollywood blockbusters? Entirely possible, if they put their heart and mind to it.
Amazing. Thank you. Amir, I'll shoot over a question to you. There's one for you specifically. You successfully moved cutting-edge AI research into real products. What are the top 3 pitfalls founders face when attempting to commercialize research-grade technology?
That's jumping across a lot of different steps. You have something that's in research, which means that it has very limited testing, minimal, maybe real world testing, because most academics just get access to some set of data that they have in their field, and they've trained the system and tested it minimally. So oftentimes, you don't even know whether that technique will work. So there's a fundamental risk that you have to kind of allocate to whatever you're bringing in. What that means is that you really need to know your trade. You need to have a very strong gut, because at that point, you can only look at that data and develop a gut, and it's not 100% information. So number one, what technique to bet on? Number two, people. There's some people that work in academia that are really not well suited for work in companies at all. They don't understand the concept of a deadline. They don't understand that the work is ultimately good when a customer says it is good, as opposed to some theoretical measure that they might have in their mind. But there are others who are absolutely brilliant. So it's also kind of like either finding the right people or augmenting that person with people that can carry them and do that. So the team construction, it's almost like a special forces team where you got, a small team, but it has to have very distinct characteristics. And the third thing is the customer. Because one of the risks of doing something high-end, cutting edge that is new and bringing it to a customer is that who at the customer are you engaging with? If you're engaging with a large company and if you're engaging, for example, with the R&D team and you're getting R&D budget, you're probably in trouble unless you have a good engagement plan. Because generally what these R&D teams try to do is they'll run a POC with multiple companies, and they don't really even have the clout sometimes internally in their company to take even a successful POC and make it a plan of record. And to reward a company that takes all the risks on the left that I described and actually goes and delivers results, then they kind of look at that and say, interesting. And then you're like, what do you mean interesting? When do we implement this across your company? And a lot of times you say, well, you know what, we haven't really thought about that, but maybe next year's budget or something like that. So this happens more often than you would imagine. And I would say that these three areas are the biggest. When you deal with government, then you have a whole different set of things around acquisition and all of that, which does lead to delays. There's also a lot of soft criteria, which is mainly things like, do you have a cage code? Do you have this clearance? Do you have a facility security clearance? Things like that, which can take years.
Right.
So I would say between commercial and military, those are the real challenges that kind of I've seen.
Thanks. I think Bilal, you have to drop off. You have an LP call. Somebody had a question about your glasses and your fund being named after your glasses, but I think you already answered that in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us. I really
No,
appreciate
thank
it,
you.
Bilal.
I wanted to end with one statement that I also wrote, which is, Amir is a great role model that I think I really want people to pay attention to. Sometimes we overlook and we just say, okay, Amir is is another founder or something. Amir is like top of his field, is extremely knowledgeable, cutting edge technology, blah blah blah, all that stuff, right? He is building companies that are competing with the best in America, worldwide, or whatever it is, and at the same time, he's proudly Pakistani, right? And I think that's something we should really admire and really try to emulate, right? Like we can be who we are, we can support each other, we can be promoting and encouraging other people, like he's done many times over, including now. And I think we can be solving grand challenges in this field. This is very, very early. Like anybody who would sit back and say AI has been played out simply hasn't seen the movie before. And people like Amir and I have seen this movie many times over. This is just beginning. This is probably, why I'm starting a new venture fund. It's like the next 10 to 20 year journey of building amazing companies in physical AI. And similarly for many other fields as well. And I think, Pakistan would do well if we took this very seriously and as I said, find interesting problems that we need to solve. People, almost like God has provided you with now a set of tools that previously were less available to you, and it's increasingly reducing the cost and access barriers to you. Use that and build amazing companies. And Amir and I are certainly, I speak to him often enough that, we're here to help and support in any way which we can, right? I mean, that's the whole point of being here. We're not here because we want to promote ourselves. We're here to encourage others to do what is possible and see where our resources and our little bit of our credibility, if we can lend that to the other person, if that can be helpful to them, we're happy to do that.
Very well said. I feel the same way about both of you, frankly. And the one message I'll just kind of try to get across is that, number one, in Pakistan, wherever I look, there is opportunity everywhere. And it's actually very low-hanging opportunity. Like you don't need to be a rocket scientist to make a lot of money in Pakistan. When I left Pakistan on the 10th of August in 1996, the KSE was at about 1,200 points. Today, it's at 114 plus thousand points. And you would look at that and you would say, but US dollar, US dollar. No, even when you factor in the US dollar, the KSE over 30 years has returned more than the S&P 500. If I ask you to name one person that you know in Pakistan that materially is doing worse than their parents or worse than their grandparents, it's really, really hard to find the name of such a person. Very hard. In general, the upward mobility in Pakistan is insane. You can't find people that you've known for a couple of generations where the current generation is doing worse. And at the same time, in much of the West, it's the opposite. So it's not about absolutes. It's really about the direction of the country. And there are such big macro indicators as to what the direction of the country is. How can a country outperform the S&P 500, the greatest exchange on earth, in dollar terms, through wars, famines, floods, confrontations, assassinations? And imagine a slightly more stable situation. Since 1947, we've averaged slightly over 5% growth, around 5% growth. During the 200 years the British ruled the subcontinent, we were at 0.25% growth. So we constantly criticize ourselves. We say that we're stupid and corrupt and we're uneducated and we're not worth much. And at the same time, what magic happened in 1947 that our growth shot up from 0.2 to 5%? What magic happened over the last 30 years when we were criticizing every aspect of our country, when our stock exchange delivered greater returns than the best stock exchange in the world? Um, the potential in Pakistan is so crazy, actually, that the issue is like, how do you do so many things all at the same time? That's the issue. That's the challenge. And the other issue is that the venture environment in Pakistan is still very nascent. So the reason why I appreciate Faisal so much, and obviously, lots of friends in this community that all thinking the same thing now, which is that we have to now take a stand. We have to take a stand and actually become a community and not just talk about what you did and I did and the other guy did, but actually be a community that reinforces itself, that is true to each other, that helps and reinforces, and is one with the same goal of building a diaspora globally that we all can be proud of, and taking the benefits of what God has given us, whether in mind or heart or in earnings or in the value we've built, and uplift Pakistan. If we're not going to do it, then what are we relying on other people for? So the reason I appreciate Faisal so much is because he's there and doing it. And I'm gonna talk to Faisal. I'm gonna figure out what we can do more formally to get some things going, bring robotics to Pakistan, talk about that, right? And at the end of the day, the same thing with Bilal. Bilal's going to do something new. All of us should help him. And maybe
Yes.
some of us can only help him with words, and others can help in other ways. But he's a Pakistani. He's going to be a great investor. This fund will do well. We got to go help him, and we've got to help each other. And that's the way it is. Now, we got to learn and we got to get better and we got to be more professional, but we got to stick with each other because the world right now in particular reminds you that it's a dog eat dog world. So if you can find a family around you to help you and support you, it only helps in that journey of growth and that journey of prosperity. And that's my wish to all of you. I hope you are able to find partners and friends that you can go build this with and benefit the country of your origin. I think that's a noble goal.
Amir, thank you so much. Every time I talk to you, it's you always inspire me and you motivate all of us about Pakistan. And even the last time when I had so many questions, a few of the things you said to me really made me think about things in a different way. Where Pakistan, we keep thinking Pakistan's lost the opportunity, but the opportunity is still there in every aspect. And it really comes down to the keyword you said is being cohesive or faith and discipline in a way,
Yeah.
right?
The
It comes
last
back to
thing,
the original words.
I know all the stuff that's going on. I just want to share one last thing, just again a
Yes.
fact, not my opinion, which is that, do you know the Gini coefficient in Pakistan, is higher than our neighbors. We keep getting told, oh, you guys are poor, you don't have money, you're running out of money, you're so poor. Dude, give me a break. Zoom out. You've got half the population density. You've got 2x or more per capita mineral wealth. You've got 65% undocumented economy, maybe 75%. The reason why India's economy isn't undocumented is they did a good thing. They did demonetization. It doesn't change, demonetization doesn't change the reality of what happens on a day-to-day basis. It just changes what numbers get counted in a column in a spreadsheet. Those numbers still exist in Pakistan. And so when you look at when the Turkish researchers did this study of Pakistan versus India, and they said, well, how is this a 1.65 times delta in per capita. If you look at spending patterns, Pakistan actually correlates in terms of spending patterns of families with much higher per capita countries. How the hell is this happening? And then the state bank governor says, oh, yeah, it's because 70% undocumented. And then the finance minister. So you now have three absolutely unrelated, trustworthy sources saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But this is a simple thing to fix. If you fix this, the world now sees you as, well, you're just the same, it's the same per capita. And despite all the issues and the troubles, right? So this whole nonsense of woe is me, everyone's corrupt. If you haven't lived in another country and you haven't dealt with their politicians, you don't know what's corrupt. I would tell you that right now, given what's happening in the Middle East and given what's happening in Europe and given what's happening here, our politicians are angels in comparison in Pakistan. Let me just tell you that. They're angels in comparison, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's just like, stop complaining. Like, everyone wants to find something to find a nit in, and yet the country keeps giving. The country just keeps giving. So anyway, so I this is like this is an existential belief with me, right? And I do hope that some people, I'm sure some people listen to it and they get upset, but I hope that some people also listen to it and try to understand where I'm coming from and just look at the facts. Forget my passion, forget my words, just look at the facts and tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that actually agree, and it's music to their ears that somebody's actually saying something motivational. I think the biggest problem we have is that everybody criticizes, but nobody's got a solution. So we need more people like you to, constantly inspire us. So I really appreciate your time. Always inspirational, and always I learned something new. Thank you so much. I think Bilal's already stepped out, so thanks to Bilal as well for being here, and pleasure to host people like you. And thank you, Ali, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you,
Thanks
Ali.
again.
Thank you, everyone, for
Yeah.
joining. All my best to all of you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.